All right, welcome everyone. We're going to talk about, this is our Lobby 101 session about engaging our local elected officials on climate solutions. I'm going to go ahead and go over the agenda. I'm realizing okay, let's try again. Okay, so we'll go over the agenda. So we're going to start, I'm going to do kind of my portion of the presentation is going to include the first 4 bullets here. So starting with why we engage elected officials, what is the purpose, walking through that Lobby 101, really what it can look like, talking, as Tom mentioned when we were doing intros, lobbying during COVID looks a lot different than lobbying, if you haven't done it in a few years. So we'll talk about the differences, sometimes the advantages of lobbying when we're all on Zoom. We'll go through some myths and missteps. I think often the best way to learn is to learn what not to do. So that can be fun. And that'll be kind of the formal presentation. Then the plan was to do a small group practice. So, jumping in and working, tying it all together by using the meeting plan, just a template meeting plan, and doing a little practice with, to get more comfortable using that and what that would look like. And so we'll do that. We'll kind of debrief from that, and then that'll end my chunk of the presentation, and I'll turn it over to Alan, knowing that some of you here, might be here or might not realize you are, but you might be later here because you're going to be lobbying with New York Renews. I know that they've got their lobby days weeks coming up over the next throughout this month, meeting with state level elected officials. And so Alan's going to give us that CCIA 101. So whether you do end up lobbying with that group or just, it's really important in New York State that we're educated and we can all across our climate movement be speaking to that policy. So we'll do a quick overview of that. So to start off, what's the point of engaging with our elected officials? And, I think I wanted to share this slide just knowing that, as things get more and more polarized and more, gridlock and, at the state and especially at the national level, it can feel like, what's the point? The cynicism can be justified or can feel justified or can feel like logical to be cynical about, it's just, nothing will ever move in Congress. But, it's a helpful reminder that, just that cynicism is a form of obedience. So when we're taking that, it's the easy path to be cynical about something, to say, well, nothing's going to change, so I'm not going to try. And so we have to take that harder path of saying it might be really, really, really hard, but we're going to try. We're going to take that optimistic path and see what changes we can make. So, and the reason for that when we think about working with our elected officials is this: politicians don't create political will, they respond to it. And really, that's like, if you remember one thing from tonight, really, you can sign off Zoom right now. This is what you need to know. Politicians don't create political will, they respond to it. So what does that mean for us? That means that we create the political will, and that if our politicians aren't doing what we want them to be doing, it's because we have more work to do. So, that power, shifts back into us and into our hands. And so we have to think about what we're going to do, how we're going to use that power, and how to be strategic and effective with it. And so you guys know this. How do we communicate with elected officials? What are our different levers to pull? How do we show political will? People can, I won't be able to see the chat, though you can certainly put it in the chat, or just unmute, call out. It's not a trick question. It's easy. How do we communicate?
Phone calls, emails.
Mm-hmm.
The local office or national office, depending, or state office, I guess.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, exactly like Daryl said, the calls, going, it used to be in person to town halls or virtual town halls, emails, letters, social media, if you're on social media, and meeting in person or via Zoom for lobby meetings, and that all of these are different tools and they're all effective in different ways. They all have different purposes. And when we're, it can feel discouraging to be told, like, just call your member of Congress. And it's like, feeling like, well, that's just this drop in the bucket. What's the point? Again, that cynicism creeping in. But when we're all together, when we're a group, a group making this powerful statement together, that's that collective voice, and that's when things can move forward. I know we've definitely heard, directly from staffers, from members of Congress office who are the ones answering the phone saying, their job is to tally up how many calls did we get, on each issue this week, what were the top 5, have a report on my desk at the end of the week. And so that, the question for us to be asking ourselves is, are we getting climate in that top 5, or that, that top list of calls and emails and things that they're hearing about week to week, day to day, and week to week and month to month. So now we get to the lobbying. The actual, lobbying is where you're sitting down with someone and having that that conversation about a specific policy or about a specific issue. Just to put, again, most of you know me or have worked with me in different capacities. But like I said, I will be wearing my Citizens Climate Lobby hat tonight, only because that's where my lobby experience comes from. So I'll be using, most of the examples I share will be about Citizens Climate Lobby and specifically about federal level lobbying, because again, that's what I've done. But that I think by and large, all of the steps and the principles and the ideas can apply at all levels. So whether that's, you're doing a state level lobby meeting, you're meeting with your local town supervisor, your, city council, whoever it might be, the kind of principles behind it are the same. So just wanted to point that out, that although I'll probably mention, lobbying in DC and things like that, it's really applicable no matter where you are. And so, because really all it comes down to is this. So this is Mark Reynolds, who's Citizens Climate Lobby's executive director, says this all the time, like we bet the farm on relationships. So it's really about building relationships and not the one-off, okay, we did it, done, now we're gonna move on to the next thing, but building those relationships over the long term with our elected officials, and moving them bit by bit, sometimes maybe steps, sometimes big steps up what we call like the climate champions ladder. So, they might, whatever rung they're on, we're just trying to move them to that next step by building, a respectful and, partnership with those offices. And so we'll talk about what that looks like and how we do that through our lobbying. So we'll go through the lobby meeting basics. So, you might be, some questions you might be wondering, like, okay, I wanted to lobby, what does that even mean? What does that look like? So starting with, how do you do a lobby meeting? How do you schedule a meeting? Sometimes you might connect with a group that's already lobbying, and I think that is fabulous because, more collective voices together. But if you are the one who's, for a group or for an issue that, that you're working on for your Color Your Community Green team or something like that, you might be the one tasked with scheduling a meeting. And so what does that look like? It's really as simple as, picking up the phone, sending an email. Every office is different. So some will have a scheduler that you have to work with. Some will want you to schedule online. So, they'll have different expectations, but you won't know until you call, and do your research online. What we always say with Citizens Climate Lobby is it takes polite persistence. So you might call and not hear back. and that's to be expected. Don't let that discourage you. Don't give up. Don't say, well, they didn't want to meet with me, so they must not care about this issue. Just knowing how busy at all levels of government, how busy the staff and the representatives are. I know if you were on our, we had a wonderful call with Jen Lunsford month or so ago, where she kind of gave us an insider view of state level politics, and just hearing how small her staff was and how much is on their plate. I get why they might not respond to an email right away, and why they would appreciate a gentle follow-up nudge or a phone call to make sure you saw the email. So you might be wondering, where do we meet? Maybe you're meeting with a federal legislator and I can't get to DC. You could go to DC or to Albany to have these meetings, though not these days. There's also district offices where you can be meeting. But by and large, I would say almost all lobby meetings the past year plus have been via Zoom, which has actually been a nice innovation in many ways. And we'll get to that in a bit, talking about lobbying in these strange times. And who do you meet with? Sometimes you are meeting directly with the representative, and sometimes you're meeting with their staffer. As you're researching the office, especially if it's a federal member of Congress, they might have a whole staff. Different staff might be focused on different issues, and so you can research and see, who is focused on the things that you want to bring to the table. So those are the basics. And then how do you prepare for your lobby meeting? And so first off, you always want to do your research. You want to know not just the research, definitely the research on your issue, understand the main points, understand some of the opposition, so you can know some counterpoints, but also do your research on your representative, on your member of Congress. Know where'd they go to school, what's their background, what other policies have they supported that might be similar, what are some things that impacts they've made in your community that that you can bring up with them, because again, we're building that relationship. And yeah, even if it's not about the politics, but just oh, they have kids the same age as my kids, I'm going to mention that when I talk to them, or they went to college where my brother-in-law went to college, maybe they knew each other, things like that are really about that relationship building. So preparing for your meeting, you also want to build a team. So you can go alone, but it's way more fun to go with a crew, with some fellow climate activists, or fellow people from the community who might bring in different perspectives. When you can, it's great to have a constituent with you. Usually, in a perfect world, you'd be meeting with your own representatives, and other people in other districts would be meeting with their own representatives. But I know sometimes, especially groups like New York Renews and Citizens Climate Lobby, we're trying to meet with everybody. And so you might end up lobbying someone who's not your elected official. But when you can bring in a constituent, that can rise you to the top of their agenda, or make sure that the rep themselves does join in. So, all right, so preparing for your meeting, you did your research, you built your team, you're going to define your roles within the team, and then you'll develop your meeting plan. And I'll show you a template of a meeting plan in a bit. So we'll take a look in more detail what that can look like. But this is the basic lobby meeting format that we at Citizens Climate Lobby have kind of honed over time. Certainly other groups take a different approach, but this is what we do. We always, we say start with an appreciation. And so you want to, do that just to kind of start off on a nice foot, start off on something positive. Even no matter who you're meeting with, and whether or not they're going to agree with your issues or be receptive to what you're saying, if you can start on that positive appreciation, that can really have a powerful impact. You want to connect, you want to, do your intros, connect the issues to what they're interested in. you want to have some discussion around the issues, some conversation, asking open-ended questions, really wanting to hear from the representative or their staffer. You want to make your ask. So why are you here? What action are you asking them to take? And then you want to do your thank yous and your follow-ups. So that's the general outline. And now, as I said, we'll talk about lobbying during COVID, how that looks, how that can be different. I would say before previously Citizens Climate Lobby, we used to all pack up and go to DC and meet and have a big high energy day on Capitol Hill, which was a lot of fun, but also very expensive. And also not everyone can go. Not everyone can, has that privilege to take the time off work, have the travel expenses. So I think now that we've shifted to meetings on Zoom, it's really been nice that it's an opportunity that more people can be part of these meetings. Doesn't have the same, it's not quite the same as like the energy of, being on Capitol Hill, but I think a lot of the trade-offs have been valuable. One in things being more accessible, and even other things, being able to screen share, being able to, have a conversation in a space where everyone can sit down and be heard. And we've had meetings in literal broom closets in DC, where there, when the office did not have space for us to meet. But you can see in this picture here, there were however many, 8-9 people who were part of the meeting and able to participate. Another benefit we found is that, if you're meeting with the district office via Zoom, they can very easily patch in the Albany or the DC office, if a question comes up or if they're like, ooh, okay, this group's on the ball and I want my colleague to hear what they're saying. That's something that they can easily do when you're all already on Zoom. Trying to think what else. Anyone have, I know, Tom, you said your lobby experience has been on Zoom. Anyone have feedback or experiences that you've had doing Zoom lobbying that stood out to you?
I guess one thing is that once you make a contact with the office, with the aide you're working with, then you can contact them directly to schedule another meeting rather than going through the scheduler, which sometimes takes a long time. So, They actually worked well with Representative Reed's office. So it took like maybe 3 weeks or so to get a meeting. But once we had the contact, then we were able to get something pretty much in a couple of days.
Awesome. Yep. And yeah, that's exactly where that relationship building comes in, that once you have that connection, you're able to maintain it. Great. All right, so I will shift ahead. So we'll quick run through a couple myths and missteps, when you're thinking about lobbying. First one is taking an aggressive stance. So, I think that, it's important when you're thinking about activism and advocacy, like there's all sorts of different tactics and there's the right time and the right place for all sorts of different tactics. And they're all really crucial. I think that, only lobbying or only taking the, CCL relationship building approach, you're missing something there. Like that's really important, but we also need the out in the streets activism. And but when you think about sitting down to a lobby meeting, that's not the right place to be yelling in someone's face or accusing someone of of like, you need to take this action. It's really focusing when you're in that sit down meeting about building that common ground. You're not calling them out, you're just trying to find those points of connection so you can move them up that ladder. So I know for CCL, we had, I forget when this was, it feels so like 1,000 years ago, but we had our meeting in DC, like our lobby day, on the same day that Sunrise occupied Nancy Pelosi's office. So they, the Sunrise Group, that was kind of the first time people, a lot of people had heard of Sunrise because suddenly they were in the news because they took over Nancy Pelosi's office, and that was the same day that CCL was on the Hill, doing our lobbying. And then the following week, our bill got introduced for the first time. And I do feel, I don't have any insider information that that's why, but I feel like that combination of tactics that Sunrise was, doing this, kind of big, powerful move, showy, got in the news, really got attention to the, to the issues in a way that at the time really wasn't getting any attention. Whereas, and then behind the scenes, Citizens Climate Lobby was meeting with all 535 members of Congress. And, so I think that even though we didn't coordinate it that way, I think those two groups working in tandem is what helped move that forward. So other myths and missteps. The next one is thinking the staffer is a consolation prize. I think people have this reaction a lot when it's like, I called and they push me off to a staffer. I'm just going to meet with the staff. I'm not even meeting with the representative. It's, really important to know that the representative does a lot, but the staffers are the ones who know all the stuff. They're the ones who are really knee deep in the policy, or elbow deep, in the policy, and really understanding, all the ins and outs of the details. They're the ones who are writing up the reports and the summaries for the member of Congress or for the representative saying, here's our recommendations for you. And so, at CCL, we say, if you're meeting with the staffer, like that is the right person to be meeting with at that time, because they can really help you be a partner. They're someone you can be building a relationship with, and they can be moving things forward with you as well. Definitely you do want to, as time goes on, you do want to be able to have FaceTime with the representatives, and certainly at the state and local level, where there's, they have fewer constituents, they should be able to give you more time. And so you have different expectations at different levels. Other myths and missteps, this is kind of that bipartisan, nonpartisan one. One is assuming that Republicans won't be interested in climate action at all and writing them off, not even meeting with them. I know, CCL being a nonpartisan organization, we do meet with everybody, whether or not they they agree with us. And one surprise we had in DC was meeting with a representative from Kansas who we thought, was really, very little interest in climate. They didn't have, we didn't even bring up climate, but as soon as we sat down, they started talking about wind power. Kansas has a lot of wind, and it's one of the fastest growing industries and well-paying jobs in their state. And they were very excited about wind power. And so that's where you can be finding common ground, agreeing on clean energy solutions. Just because your motivations are different, that's okay if you can get to the same end goal. The flip side of that is assuming, my rep's a Democrat, I'm sure, they always support all the green policies. They're on board. I don't even need to call and tell them that, I'm sure they'll support it. So that's another misstep. Like we said earlier, reps have lots and lots and lots and lots of issues that they're looking at. And they're looking at, okay, what am I hearing about? What are the voters, ringing our phones about? And we want that to be climate. And so it only will be if we and our partners are making those calls and making that heard. Another misstep is not having an ask. I have the easy button here because when we ask them to do something specific, we're making it easy for them. So rather than coming in and saying, here are all of the problems, here's, climate change, this is huge unsolvable problem, deal with it. If we can come in saying, here's the problem, here's how it impacts our district, and here's the legislation I'd like you to pass, to turn this around, they can do that. They can't solve climate change in one fell swoop, but they can sign on to a policy, or they can attend a hearing, or have a conversation with someone about an issue. So making sure that you're asking them to do something specific and actionable, because otherwise they're just going to smile politely and move on with their day if you haven't put them to task for something. Another misstep, and always at this point in this presentation, I'm like, oh, I'm doing this right now, is talking too much. In CCL, we've actually started to write on our notes sheet. There's a place to indicate how much percent of the time were the volunteers, were the lobbyists talking, and what percent of the time were we listening? Was the member of Congress or the staffer talking? And the goal is to have it be 50-50, to really be, yeah, we have a lot we want to say, a lot we want to share, but really the point of that meeting is to hear from them, because we want to be gathering intelligence and knowing, where do they stand? What are their concerns? As I learn more about their concerns, I'm going to know what approach to take next to bring them on board with me. And so if you go in and talk the whole time, you're not going to know when you leave, what did they think? So that one's super important. And last one here is forgetting to follow up. So again, this is a relationship. It's not a one and done. And so you want to be making sure that, if you said you were going to send them some information, you do that promptly, you follow up with a thank you for meeting. And if they said, well, they certainly did, because you asked them to do something specific. And so whatever their, response was, if they said, yes, I'll read this study, I'll ask the member of Congress what they think, I'll get back to you. You want to be following up and keeping them accountable to whatever they said yes to. So we've referenced a few times the meeting plan, which kind of ties all of that together, ties together the, the agenda, the format overview, ties together some of those, tips and best practices that we talked about. And so what we'll do, I'll quick show you the, a template meeting plan, which is on Google Docs. And if you ever wanted to use it, you can just make a copy and edit it, use it however you want for any meeting. And it's really general enough that you could use it for anything, for state, local, federal meeting. So we'll go over that quickly, and then we'll have some practice time where we'll have the participants go into a breakout room and work through it and make a meeting plan. So let me just show you the template quickly. So this is the meeting plan template, gives you space to, put the basics. This question, if you are going in asking about specific legislation, it's just taking that minute. What do we think they're going to say? Do we think that they are, absolutely against it? Are they already a co-sponsor? You want to know that before you go into the office. So taking that time to reflect, because really that's going to drive your goals for the rest of the meeting. If they're already a co-sponsor, you're going to have a very different set of goals and things you're working towards, versus if it's someone who you're pretty sure won't vote for it and really might, need some of that basic level education about the bill. Next, you want to think about your goals for the meeting, so whether the ultimate goal is, asking them to sign on to something, maybe it's you've never met with them before and you just want to, get to know them, get to know their stance on climate, on different issues. There's usually like 2 or 3 goals, that you might go into with a meeting as you make your plan. You want to think about the roles for the meeting. So who's going to be kind of leading things, facilitating conversation. We always like to assign a note taker. So somebody who's really capturing not so much what we say, but what we're hearing, because again, gathering that intelligence. We always assign someone to do that appreciation, because it's that important. You want to make sure that there's somebody doing that research, finding something that you do agree with, which sometimes, an action that they've taken, sometimes it's super easy. You can just look at the latest news story about the representative. Sometimes you have to dig really deep and find something where they they opened the new post office and, you know, thank you. So you want to have your appreciation. You want to assign someone to do that follow-up. So that way, right from the get-go, you know who's going to be, you know, sending those PDFs or, you know, whatever follow-up items. And these days on Zoom, you know, it's nice to have somebody who's on hand to be the tech co-host, someone who's feels comfortable with, you know, muting people or whatever needs to be done. You know, getting the link out if somebody loses it, someone who feels comfortable with the tech. And I guess that's if you're hosting the meeting, which I would say often, from my experience at least, often we are the ones hosting the meeting. You know, they'll just say, send me the link and I'll be there. So this also includes a sample agenda. So, you know, similar to what we walked through on the slides, but, you know, starting with, you know, everyone introduces themselves. Someone, you know, says, you know, before we begin, just wanted to thank you for, you know, the powerful stance you took on blah, blah, blah. Always doing a time check, you know, one, showing them that you're respectful of their time. How much time do you have for us tonight? But then also, you know, part of the time check is if, you know, you thought you had 45 minutes and they say, you know what, we've got a conflict, we only have another 10 minutes today. You can kind of quickly regroup and make sure you know, cut out some of the something and really get to the main point, you know, so you make sure you're meeting your goals for the meeting. Because that's definitely happened to us before as well. You want to go over, you know, why we're here, overview the meeting. Often people kind of save that to the end, you know, like you don't want to show all your cards at the beginning of why you're there. But then the thing is the staffer or the member of Congress is spending the whole time wondering, what are they here? What is this all going towards? You know, as you're describing local climate impacts and they're nodding because they know about the local climate impacts, you know, and waiting to get to, okay, they're here to ask about this bill. Great. So you want to start with that. You know, introduce, you know, share facts about the legislation, you know, that you're coming to ask about. Typically we'll ask first, are you familiar with this? You know, and that way give them, you know, we won't give the basic overview if they say, oh yes, you know, I just read through that bill yesterday. Make sure you make that primary ask, and then having a list of open-ended questions. So again, this is that listening component. And often this, you know, agenda gets, you know, it's much more fluid than it looks here. And then there's space here for, you know, making notes on those, and then the open-ended questions. There's some samples here, but it's just, and often as you think about your meeting goals, that might drive the kind of questions that you ask as you're thinking about what is it that we want to hear from them and what can we ask so that we can hear it, you know, as specifically as we can. So, you know, how can we be a resource to your office? What voices do you listen to in the district? Those things that are then going to become your marching orders for how am I going to bring this person along with me? So that is the meeting plan. What I want to do is I'll copy link address. I'm going to drop that link into the chat. Here we go. Okay, so everyone click that, make sure you can access it, because you'll be using that for the breakout time. And so what we want to do is we'll split you guys out with the scenario here, which is lobby visit. I said I picked at random my representative Jeremy, you know, lobby visit with State Senator Jeremy Cooney was scheduled at the last minute. It's first thing tomorrow morning, and so there's 10 minutes to plan it. And then tomorrow morning, you're going to be, sitting down with that representative to have that meeting. And so let's assume that, this is about the CCIA, the Climate Community Investment Act, but that one of your lobby team members is already an expert on the bill. So it's not so much worrying about, I don't know how to talk about this bill or this policy. I need to, do a refresher on that, but just to walk through like, okay, how do we look like a put together group when we meet tomorrow? Who's going to do what, assigning the roles, what are our goals for this meeting? Maybe do some quick research on Cooney, see if, where he stands on these issues, sketch out your agenda. You have 10 minutes. This is a real life scenario because I know when this happened when I was in DC, I got a text while in between meetings, someone saying, we just got a meeting scheduled. It's in an hour. There's no constituents who can join. Can you join? And so, yes, so we, grabbing people as we walked down the hall and, got together and sketched our meeting agenda and walked in the office and had a meeting. So it can be done. So I just wanted to, I will stop talking. Oh, and look, we've had a new person join while I was talking. So welcome, Matt. Good to see you.
Yes, Sarah, I'm going to have to go, so I won't be in the breakout room. I have another meeting I have to run.
Oh, got it. All right. Well, I'm glad you could join us, Tom.
Okay.
Thank you.
So
Sure.
see you later.
Tom.
All right. And Brady, were you able to, are you doing the breakouts?
I
think
did,
you could
but
probably.
maybe I should. I'm gonna need to change them now that Tom left. How many rooms though?
Well, why don't you just put Daryl, Matt, Greg, and Linda all in just make them a group together. Toss them in. So really just have one room. Unless others have other proposals. But any questions on what you're being tasked with? We'll give you 10 minutes. Okay.
No
Did you?
questions. I want to open the breakout room.
All right. So you'll have 10 minutes. You've got that link, and then we'll talk about how it went before we turn it over to Alan. So.
Okay.
See you guys back here.
And I'm going to pause the recording.
Oh, smart. Your breakouts, Alan let me know that there actually is a Jeremy Cooney meeting that was scheduled at the last minute tomorrow. So if anyone got a taste for it, if you guys came up with a good plan, maybe he'll borrow it. But yeah, I just wanted to hear from you guys from out in your breakout. How was the experience? Any reflections on that process?
This is Linda. I found it helpful to have the discussion to lay out the game plan.
Good.
Especially when
Yeah.
there's limited time. Yeah, it's good to be focused and to even ensure that we're all really familiar with the legislator and their record and just knowing how to be, at once appreciative of whatever things they've done that are good that we are grateful for, but also to know how we need, the angle that we need to come in at in order to get what we want. Like whether they are likely co-sponsor or not, or.
Yep. Yeah. Thinking about that strategic angle of how do we get them where we want them to be. Yeah. Greg, it looked like you were muted, but were you starting to say something earlier? And you're still muted.
Okay, there we go again. All
There
right. Yeah, just getting the ask together and what we wanted to ask and, getting more specific on that. It's nice to have the discussion with a few different people so everybody's ideas can be expressed and we can come to a conclusion of what we want to do. So
Mhm.
I thought that was good.
Yeah, that's a great point, Greg. There is something productive about the collaborativeness of pulling
Right.
together the meeting plan.
Yeah.
You know, bringing in different perspectives and ideas, and that's the whole idea. You know, is bringing in different voices. You know, around one message. So that's really well said.
Mhm.
Matt, no pressure, but anything you wanted to share? Any reflections?
I don't know if he heard you.
Oh, you talking to me?
Oh yeah, I'm
Sure.
sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't
Talking to
hear my
me?
name called, so I was just confused. Okay, I had a feeling it was like because I haven't said anything. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
just
it
asking
was-
any reflections on your end, and no pressure.
Yeah, I was like researching, like what Senator Cooney had and hadn't supported, and it was definitely more. I had to dig. It was harder to find the information than I wanted, like than I thought it would be.
Mhm.
Specifically, like when it came to climate stuff. So I think making sure you sort of get all your bases covered was something that I learned very briefly in that.
Yeah.
breakthrough.
Yeah, that's a valuable takeaway. Definitely. Cool. All right.
So,
Well,
Sarah, I have a question.
yeah.
If he's researching the background, okay, this is just before the meeting goes on, is that correct? Or when is this done? When is this meeting? When do we meet to set our agenda, set our plan, make our plan? When is it usually done?
You know, sometimes like in this, you know, pretend scenario, it's like sometimes you do have a very last minute meeting and
Right,
that gets
right.
scheduled and you throw it together. I would say more often, you know, maybe and Katie, Brady, Ellen chime in. Like I would say usually maybe you have like at least a week often, you know, you
Oh, okay.
schedule and it's sometimes a week or even more away. And so you have time to get your team together and do some of that research and sometimes you don't.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking it'd be great if everybody knew what the result of the research was, which if it's a week before, that'll be, you know, everybody will be aware. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
gives you time to share that with the team.
Yeah. Okay.
Katie?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think, you know, last year when we were doing our initial CCIA meetings with state legislators, we actually ended up having 2 meetings, one kind of early to figure out it's just a big complicated bill and we were trying to wrap our heads around it. And you don't have to be experts on it, but we all felt like we wanted to have a basic understanding. And then we had a shorter meeting right before that was like, okay, are we really all set here? Let's actually run through the presentation we had. And this time around, we did, it was one meeting and it was a lot shorter and it's closer to the actual lobby meeting time. But I'd say it's nice to have an appreciation that it's timely. I mean, you don't have to, but it's, they're always busy and they're always doing things. And so if you're paying attention to their Twitter feed or something and you catch something that they just did like within the last couple of days, it's nice to be able to celebrate that if it works.
Yeah, the Twitter
Yeah.
feed is actually a good place to go for that.
Yeah. Good point.
Isn't it good to, I struggle with this a little bit. I don't want to overthink it, but just to recognize that a representative like that, they really represent a lot of people. And just because a few people come and try to urge them in a direction doesn't mean that they can go entirely by that. So aren't we like, first of all, we're getting as many people as we can to lobby. But second of all, aren't we appealing to their better nature too? Like sometimes to support something because they should know that it's in everyone's interest, even if they're not hearing from everyone. You know what I mean?
Well,
Yeah.
can I respond?
Yeah,
Sure.
please.
Yeah, there are three basic reasons to get a politician to support a bill. Number one, it's morally the correct thing to do. And there are some senators in New York State who will support a bill purely on that basis. Second, it's good for their district in the long run, and that's what you're talking about. And that's appropriate too. Of course, unfortunately, most of what we deal with is, will the voters like it and reelect them? And I suppose that's appropriate too. And that's the way, in this case, in the case of the CCIA, that's the hard ask. In generally it will, but convincing them is a little harder than that. I mean, we know it's morally right, and we know it's good for their district in the long run.
Right.
So,
I remember some years ago, I went with the environmental working group with a few people from Rochester on a bus to Albany. And we met, and it was about GMO labeling. And we met in a few state assembly or Senate offices, never with the actual representative, but with the staffer. But the one that always stuck out in my mind was Rich Funke's office. And we met with a staffer, and he was very good. He was smart. He was poised. He invited us in, sat us down in the conference room, and listened to us very quietly. And then after we were done, he said, well, the senator doesn't support this. And I'll tell you why, because the farming community is not in favor of it. And I thought, oh my gosh, I took a day off from work, came all the way out here for nothing, and it just struck me that at least in that particular thing, the way to lobby is to lobby the people, or at least they need to hear from more people or something, Just us coming out there and telling, and giving him reasons why we thought he should do it wasn't enough. And I guess sometimes you don't win at lobbying either. And so that's just how it is.
That's such a good example, Daryl, because that's something where that nugget of information, to me, that could be like, okay, all right, now we know what to do next. Thank you for, giving us our next step, reaching out to farmers. Let's bring a farmer next time on the bus with us.
Sure. Right.
And
that's a better way of looking at it.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's really strategic, the way you're thinking about okay, are we just the 5 people in the room, but how do we represent more people? And so thinking about how what can you bring, whether it's an endorsement from a local organization or a rep from a local organization, or a signed petition or a stack of signed letters, to show that there's more people, than just me, but behind this.
Sure.
So those can be really strategic things.
And GMO labeling might not be as compelling in a moral sense as climate, the threat of climate change. And so the bigger the threat, it's better to have maybe a higher moral threshold. But I think I still would be in favor of GMO labeling, but I don't think it rises to the same level as climate change. So I think that there would be a better opportunity to appeal to the morality of a senator or an assembly woman or man or whatever. But anyway.
Right. Katie, were you going to chime in?
Yeah, and I definitely will keep this short for you, Alan, but there's different types of wins as well. It's not just co-sponsorship and it's not just voting yes, but also we learned that there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes about moving it into the right committees and making sure that the committee leads are in favor of it, and there are sign-on letters that are kind of internal. And I'm going to share a document that is a transcript from Jen Lunsford's webinar from September. And it has a lot of really, I think, new information and really good information. So check it out if you weren't able to watch that webinar. And now I'm going to shut down my video and probably go quick hit stop.
Deal with bedtime. Okay.
Alan, I just wanted to say I appreciated your summarizing those points. Thank you.
I think you already had it. You just needed to be reminded.
Yeah, that was really valuable. All right, so let me turn it over then to Alan for the CCIA 101. So it really good conversation. I appreciated people's thoughts and feedback. But we'll let Alan talk about, the specific bill that we're really hoping to see move through our state legislature. Thanks, Alan.
Okay, sure. So the title of my talk is the CCIA in context. I'm just trying to give you a sense of how the CCIA intermeshes with the CLCPA. And as I was preparing for this discussion, I expected to see exactly what I see in front of me, which is a bunch of people who have varying degrees of familiarity with these laws. And so I decided it would be a good idea to explain the rationale of the CCIA to give you a sense of why the bill is structured in the way it is. It'll also give you a better feel for why those of us who are fighting for it think it's the best way to deal both with climate change and with the racial injustices plaguing New York State. Now, I'm not getting movement. Okay, let's try this. Oh, well, I just jumped. Hold on. Okay. If you've seen the information New Yorker News puts out in support of the CCIA, you've probably seen the phrase, make polluters pay. New York News uses the slogan to promote the bill, and it works because on a basic level, people know that the fossil fuel industry really doesn't have our best interests at heart. But there's more to it than that. It's about forcing polluters to deal with the costs to society that they've up until now been able to externalize. Let's look at healthcare costs. Every year in New York State, hundreds of people are dying pollution-related deaths and thousands more are hospitalized. And it's all because of pollution-related illnesses. The polluters aren't paying for it. They've externalized those costs. The largest cost by far, though, of course, is global climate change. Now, ExxonMobil definitely wins the cost shifting game. It's hard to beat their secret studies, which show a contribution to the problem coupled with decades of public denial. But all the fossil fuel producers are doing it. They make big money and we get a climate crisis. Now, we're not all suffering equally. In New York State and across the country in general, Black and brown communities are suffering more than white communities from pollution and climate change. Because of the legacy of redlining, they live in parts of cities where heat effects are worse, and they're more likely to live in flood zones. Also, because of the legacy of redlining, they get more vehicle traffic pollution than white communities, and truck depots tend to be located where they live. So they live higher, closer to that, and also closer to higher traffic roads. Polluting industries tend to site their facilities in Black and brown communities because these communities don't have the resources to keep the polluters out. Polluters go there because it's easy. Most people in Black and brown communities also don't have the resources to move away when the polluters come in. They have no choice but to stay and deal with the consequences as best they can. All this is true, even correcting for income. And even though Black and brown communities contribute proportionally less to pollution than white communities. That's the legacy of systemic racism. And we've seen it play out during the COVID pandemic when infected residents of frontline communities, at least partially because of pollution-related health problems, got sicker and died more often than infected whites. Now, the CCI was conceived as the second part of an answer to the problems I've described. The first part, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, is already law, and it was signed in December of 2019. It sketches out an aggressive agenda toward reining in global climate change by mandating these goals, which include renewable energy production benchmarks, 100% renewable energy by 2040, and net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Now, at least 35% of the benefits of the law go to disadvantaged communities, primarily Black and brown. Unfortunately, the bill is short on details of how we get there. It specifies that a climate action council will flesh out the details. And this is happening now, but fossil fuel interests, there are two of them on the council, are trying to derail the process. Also, the funding mechanism for the CLCPA was removed as a compromise to get Governor Cuomo to sign it. That's why the CCIA is so needed. Its polluter fee not only provides a payment structure for the CLCPA, but forces the fossil fuel industry to pay for it. By doing this, it will make the sale price of fossil fuels reflect the true cost of their use. Also, throughout the bill, there are specific provisions aimed at rectifying the racist effects of pollution and global warming. The CCI addresses environmental injustice throughout the bill. 30% of the polluter fee goes to a climate jobs and infrastructure fund, which pays for the big work of building a carbon-free electric and transportation grid. It also ensures that disadvantaged communities share in the benefits. Priorities include, number one, large-scale solar, offshore wind, and energy storage projects. Number two, improve public transit and vehicle electrification with support for EV infrastructure. Number three, electric grid modernization with a more resilient transmission system and access to publicly owned renewable energy. Number four, energy conservation projects, both in private residences and public buildings. Number five, public school energy efficiency and electrification, especially of school buses, prioritizing schools serving disadvantaged communities. And number six, daycare centers, again, prioritizing disadvantaged communities. The law specifies that projects must advance social equity through community ownership and governance, involve youth, the incarcerated, and the formerly incarcerated, and develop a workforce program to train and hire workers from disadvantaged communities for high-quality careers. The 33% of the money will go to a community just transition fund, which will support only projects that are physically located in disadvantaged communities or directly benefiting these communities. All projects have to do at least one of the following. First, reduce greenhouse gas emissions with possibilities including improving energy efficiency, reducing energy demand, local renewable energy microgrids, reduction of urban heat island effects. Number two, reduce non-greenhouse gas air pollution. Number three, facilitate community ownership and governance. The money is given directly to projects funded within disadvantaged communities and is to be used specifically for those communities. Preference is given to projects that include significant participation by minorities or women and maximize community ownership. It recognizes that these are poor communities, so at least 75% of each award is given up front. Now, 7% of the money goes to a worker and community assurance fund to take care of workers in communities that would otherwise be left behind by closure of polluting industries that had been big employers and taxpayers. The fund would go toward replacing lost tax revenue, retraining workers, and cleaning up polluted industrial sites, among other things. Last, and this is the part we talk about the most. Whoa, I just disappeared. Okay, 30% of the money goes directly back to households as a rebate. New Yorkers who receive the rebate are divided into four groups. The first is low-income New York City households, up to 150% of the poverty line, and they'll get a transit voucher. The second is low-income upstate households, which have the same definition of low income, and they'll get a heating voucher. Moderate income New York households up to the 60th income percentile. That's the 60th. That means 6/10 of the population will get a tax credit, whether upstate or downstate. But note that the upstate household rebate will be 50% greater than the New York City rebate, and this accounts for fuel used in transportation and increased heating costs that aren't an issue in New York City. The above rebates are also defaults. They were chosen because they can't be taxed. Households can opt for another form of rebate, such as cash, if they choose. There is no adjustment in the size of the rebate based on income. A household in poverty will receive the same rebate as a household in the 59th income percentile. Current estimates are that the upstate rebate will amount to about $1,200 per household, which will be distributed at least quarterly, according to the wording of the law. New York Renews is trying to change the bill so that the rebate is front-loaded and so that it will be delivered monthly. Now, where would the money come from? As I said earlier, it comes from making polluters pay. There'll be a $55 per ton of CO2 equivalent levied on fossil fuels at the point where they enter the New York State economy. That fee will not be levied on the consumer at the pump or by the utility that supplies the natural gas or by their heating oil supplier. It's going to be levied on the polluters. It is up to the fossil fuel company to decide whether to pass none, some, or all of the increased costs down the supply chain. The fee increases by 5% a year until 2025, and then by 2 to 5% per year based on how well greenhouse gas reduction targets are met. The polluter fee would yield an estimated $10 to $15 billion yearly, which can be used only to carry out provisions of the CCIA. That's why it's a fee and not a tax. If it were a tax, it would go right into state coffers. Now, this is brand new data, and I think it's really exciting. This is the Nyserda study Katie was referring to. It was presented at a Climate Action Council meeting on October 14th. And it shows that in the long run, the CCIA supplementing the CLCPA will save money, lots of it. Nyserda considered several scenarios to get us to net zero by 2050. And the scenario closest to the CCIA, which assumes a rapid transition away from combustion, costs $280 billion between now and 2050, but has a benefit of $430 billion, resulting in a net benefit of $150 billion over about 30 years. And I think that's a really big deal. Now, where do the savings come from? Well, it turns out that we import $30 billion per year of fossil fuels into New York State. So making them disappear saves us $30 billion a year. Health benefits of breathing clean air, which would include decreased emergency visits for asthma and pneumonia, decreased emphysema, decreased lung cancer, decreased heart disease, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, would save us $170 billion. But the biggest benefit, $260 billion, is simply avoiding the worst of the possible climate catastrophes. Now, in New York State, this means flooding downstate, and everywhere it means decreased sea level rise downstate, and everywhere it means decreased flooding. We tend not to think about the benefits of things not happening, but this is a really big deal. Now, before we wrap up, I want to point out that up until the Nyserda study, the health benefits of the CCIA hadn't received anywhere near the attention they should have. As I pointed out earlier, pollution is the major driver of health disparities between white communities and communities of color. In addition to the polluter fee, the CCIA specifies separate fees on pollutants, including but not limited to the pollutants you see on this list. It will be reductions in these pollutants that bring about the amazing health benefits I showed you on the previous slide. And there you have it. I do have another slide that I made later, which basically deals with the gas tax lie. Should I present it now?
Yeah, go for it, Alan.
Okay.
Thank
Here you basically see it. First of all, it's not true. The fee is on polluters, not at the pump. And, you know, I spent a lot of time, you get flummoxed when people say things that are not true, just blatantly untrue. You know, we're so used to dealing with facts and making sure we have our facts straight that when someone tells a flat out lie, we often don't know how to respond. So it took a while for me to come up with all of this with the help of a lot of people at New Yorker News. But, you know, this 55-cent figure, it's not anywhere in the bill. If we're throwing out imaginary numbers, I mean, we could just as well say that the price of gas will go up only 5 cents or not at all, because it really depends on how much the polluter decides to pass on. And 55 cents, I don't know where they pulled that from. They don't mention the rebate. They never mention the rebate. The rebate is high enough that you'd have to drive a gas guzzler 50,000 miles per year to burn through the rebate, even if the 55-cent figure was accurate. Now, the bill also means big benefits to communities in other ways in the form of investments. And I like to take Senator Ord as an example because he's the one that spreads all these lies. his district, because it's poorer than the average district in New York, is going to benefit big time from the CCI. And we've actually run the numbers. So why is he against improving the lives of his constituents? I mean, we can call him out on that, and we can give that information to the people we're lobbying if they want to take Ord on. So that's all I've got. I'm going to stop sharing now. And I'll take any questions you might have.
I have a
Go ahead,
couple questions. I'm a little confused by the terms ownership and participation, like with respect to people of color or whatever, or minority communities. What exactly do you mean by that? Participation in?
Oh, yeah. Well, one of the big beefs of a lot of people, a lot of organizations and communities of color, is that big environmental groups like us that are mostly white come in and do things for them as if they had no agency of their own. And so what we're hoping to do by this bill is make sure that community upfront communities or disadvantaged communities or communities of color have their own agency, that their own community is doing what they think is best, and not, you know, us telling them what to do top down. That's the
Okay, and does that relate to distribution of those funds that are designated for minority communities?
The rebates for low. You mean talk about the rebates?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yes, I guess, yeah, it'll be the rebates. Yeah.
Yeah, no, the rebates go, they're based on a formula, purely.
Oh,
on
right. No, because but isn't there 30% of the revenue collected? Isn't that going to go to minority communities?
Yes.
And
yes.
So participation in how that money is used or something like that, is that the way to
Yeah,
understand?
the formula is that if money is going to go to a disadvantaged community for building up of the community, 75% of the money has to go to organizations that are based within the community that the money is going to. And the other 25% has to be given to an organization which is putting the primary portion, the vast majority of its work into that community.
Okay.
So that makes sense?
Yeah, and then the ownership, the word ownership also, what does that mean? Actually, home ownership, or I wasn't sure.
Oh, yeah. I'm using it both in a figurative and a literal sense. In other words, we want these communities to take ownership of their project.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
And in some cases, I'm talking about the community literally owning like a microgrid. So instead of a utility taking care of their electricity supply, they have something in their community that they can own, and business ownership and ownership of training facilities, that kind of thing. So I'm using it both in a figurative and a literal sense.
Okay.
We have time maybe for one more, if there's one more question for Alan. We want to make sure we close out at 8:30.
I
see I did so well that nobody has any questions.
I could just sneak one more if nobody's going to say. So what, are people going to run across the border into Pennsylvania to fill up their gas tank, or?
Yeah, actually, that's a very good question. That's why at the state level, New York Renews didn't support this, or I shouldn't say they don't support it, but they wanted some sort of an amendment to put on the bill because of that very issue. And yeah, that's a possibility. There's no question about it. I think it's one of the flaws of the bill. But
we need federal legislation.
Yes.
So, all right. Well, want to make sure we end on time. So thanks to everyone for joining tonight. I think we had some really appreciated our kind of open conversation times and really good perspectives and feedback. So I think we'll close it from here. So thanks everybody.
Thank you for that summary. That was great.
Okay, good.
And
thank you, everybody.
Talk to you later.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Yeah.